This is Matthew Kratter's Bitcoin University. Today I want to talk about why Bitcoin self-custody matters, and today's video is a follow-up to yesterday's video about Michael Saylor and the whole controversy around Bitcoin self-custody. So I wanted to get back to first principles today. Why is self-custody so important when it comes to Bitcoin? Why is it so important to hold your own private keys? It's important for individual Bitcoiners who don't want someone else to run off with their Bitcoin, not your keys, not your coins. If someone else is holding your Bitcoin for you, they might not give it back when you want it back, and this may be because they've lost it, or maybe they loaned it out to someone else who lost it. In other words, your Bitcoin got rehypothecated, or they don't have enough Bitcoin to make everyone whole who is asking for it back, or the government just says that they're not allowed as a regulated custodian to give you your Bitcoin back, or maybe they don't give you your Bitcoin back because they're just crooks. There's a long line of this: FTX, BlockFi, Celsius, Voyager, Gemini, Mt. Gox, Quadriga. These are all examples of where people got their Bitcoin stuck at an exchange or otherwise centralized custodian. In some cases, they got their Bitcoin back, and in some cases, they did not. Like physical gold, Bitcoin is a bearer asset. If you hold it yourself, it's yours. It's an asset without counterparty risk if you hold your own private keys, like on a hardware wallet like the Blockstream Jade or the Cold Card. And Bitcoin was specifically designed to be held by self-sovereign individuals who don't want anyone else to be able to turn off or censor their money. And this is not possible if someone else is holding your Bitcoin. In that case, you're beholden to them. Now, this doesn't mean that people should never use a custodian for Bitcoin. It doesn't mean that you can't hold Bitcoin for your toddler or your elderly parents, but it just means that the natural use of Bitcoin is as a bearer asset, where you hold your own private keys that allow you to store the Bitcoin and then send it to anyone in the world that you choose without needing to ask someone else's permission. So that's sort of back to first principles, including this principle in Bitcoin that's really part of the original Bitcoin and cypherpunk ethos, that decentralization is always preferable to centralization. And when people self-custody, you naturally get more decentralization. When they use custodians, you get more centralization of the Bitcoin holdings. And this is important because if Bitcoin holdings are spread out all around the world, being held by very different people in very different jurisdictions, it's much more difficult to steal or confiscate large amounts of it. If most of it, on the other hand, is just sitting in a few places like Fidelity and Coinbase custody, then you've created honeypots that are ripe for theft or failure or being hacked. And you're also helping to create the next target of a 6102 attack by the U.S. government. If you're enjoying this video, finding it helpful so far, please help to support the channel. Clicking the subscribe button really does help. Leave a like, leave a comment, question, suggestion for a future video, and share this video with a friend or family member. If you're not familiar with 6102 attacks, this name is based on Executive Order 6102, when President Roosevelt in the U.S. in 1933 basically forced all Americans to turn in their gold. And if your gold was sitting in a bank account, it was essentially seized and you were paid out less worthwhile dollars for it. I talk a little bit more about seizure risk and 6102 attacks in yesterday's video, which I'll link to in the description notes below. And I think Michael Saylor in this clip from Tucker actually does a great job talking about why it's more robust when people self-custody. This is from a couple of years ago.
Som et alternativ til tabletter gir Voltarol Fortegel effektiv smertelindring inntil 12 timer.
I had $1 million in a bank in Argentina 20 years ago. It was in U.S. dollars. The peso was 1 to the dollar. The Argentine government sent a memo to the banks, forcibly converted everybody's dollars to pesos, and then forcibly devalued the peso 10 for 1. And I woke up the next morning and I had $100,000. I had $1 million the day before. They stole 90% of all the currency from everybody in the country overnight on a fax, without a law, without an army. Now, how hard would it be to take all of the property of everybody in the country with Bitcoin? You have to go arrest 60 million people, sweat them all in a jail for 90 days. How do you arrest 60 million people and sweat them in jail for 90 days? It's like 1 billion times harder.
So that's the benefit of this sort of decentralization. Now here's something else that could happen if you leave your Bitcoin with Coinbase or another centralized custodian. You could receive an email that goes something like this, quote, "Thanks to a new law that was just passed by Congress for your protection, you will only be able to withdraw your Bitcoin to an approved provider like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, or Bank of America. Again, this is for your own protection, and rest assured that the Bitcoin is still yours." So in that case, that would be a very bad way. Your Bitcoin would end up being trapped among government-approved custodians, or something else could happen like this at Coinbase or another exchange or custodian. They could simply throttle withdrawals. So let's say the Bitcoin's at $1 million. It's going up approximately $10,000 every day on average at this point in time. But then Coinbase decides that they only can allow you to withdraw $5,000 worth of Bitcoin per day to self-custody, or the U.S. government decides this for Coinbase. You can draw out $5,000 worth of Bitcoin, but the value of your Bitcoin is going up approximately $10,000 a day because we're entering hyperinflation. This basically means that you'll never be able to withdraw that full Bitcoin that keeps melting up in price. You could be very wealthy, but your Bitcoin could be stuck on Coinbase. Here's another reason to self-custody. When you hold your own Bitcoin private keys, it really does train you to become a more self-sovereign individual. It teaches you how to use different kinds of hardware wallets, teaches you how to set up and run a Bitcoin node so you can get your data directly from the Bitcoin blockchain itself, teaches you about your responsibility to contribute to the Bitcoin network by being an active participant in verifying blocks and enforcing Bitcoin's consensus rules. This is what it means to run a node, and it also means that you use your own node for your own personal transactions, and that gives you freedom. Bitcoin teaches people how to become mature adults when it comes to their money, whereas fiat money teaches people how to beg and ask permission from Big Daddy government and Big Daddy banker. Bitcoin really is money for adults. It's not money for a man-child or a woman-child or people with Peter Pan syndrome. When you run your own Bitcoin node as well, when you're doing self-custody, you begin to realize that you get to decide which version of the code, the software code, to run. You begin to have a say in the Bitcoin consensus, and you begin to educate yourself about possible future changes to the protocol and which side of a future fork you would want to be on. Whereas if you leave your Bitcoin with Coinbase or at another custodian, you're basically outsourcing your ability to have an influence on future protocol changes. This is very, very important because if you're relying on Coinbase's node, you have no say into what version of the Bitcoin software they're running. Hodling your own Bitcoin, doing self-custody, helps to upgrade the civilization, helps to create strong and mature men and women. And I think it's nice to live in a culture that's run by mature, competent adults. We haven't seen that for some time in the U.S., but mature, competent adults who try to do what's best for the country and for future generations, rather than just strip mining the present and trying to enrich themselves at the expense of civilizational progress. This is the difference between the U.S. in the 1950s, for example, and the U.S. now. There was much more of an intention to do what's best for the country, maybe in the 50s and early 60s. We used to have that in the U.S., but we haven't had it in many years, as I said. Bitcoiners accept adult responsibilities and learn how to grow strong families. And this is something that self-custody and holding your own Bitcoin private keys teaches you. Bitcoiners think 10 generations out rather than just sleeping around and living paycheck to paycheck. This is modern fiat culture. And one thing is, if you hold Bitcoin rather than fiat money, rather than US dollars or euros, Bitcoin really helps to make this possible. There's no financial security for your family if you're holding the melting ice cube that's fiat, or if you're holding your Bitcoin on a third-party custodian. If Coinbase can rug your whole life savings or your family's life savings, then there's no financial security for your family. And this is why self-custody is the foundation for strong families and strong civilizations. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.